Let's begin Mem tests on the base, the second to the bottom line. We're talking about the pouring of the water. The same way they poured it on a weekday, they also poured it on Shabbos. The only thing is that Erev Shabbos, they had to go and get the water. What would they do with the water overnight? It's a problem. You're not supposed to leave water overnight. And if you do, you shouldn't be using it for drinking. And also you shouldn't be using it for services, pouring it on the Mizbeach. So let's see what's going on. The Gemara says, so what they would do is they would put it in a keli. The Mishnah said they put it in a keli that wasn't kodesh. They put it in a chavis shel zav she'ina mekudeshes. Now, I assume they covered it over, so it wasn't a problem of water that was kept overnight. If it would be exposed, that would be a problem because maybe a snake drank from it or something. There's another problem, is that sacrifices that are left overnight become pasul belina, are left overnight. So anything that has its service is supposed to be that day, and it's left overnight, so it becomes pasul. But what would be the problem? That would only be if it was put into a keli. A klisharis, that meant it was supposed to be used. That means it was niskadish, what it was niskadish, and then you left it overnight, that would be a problem. So what they would do is they would put it in a keli that wasn't a klisharis. And then as long as it was covered, it was no problem. The Gemara asks, the Gemara thinks over here is that putting water into a klisharis means a vessel that's a service vessel, a vessel that belongs to the temple. Sharis means to serve. Putting it into klisharis would only consecrate the water if there was intention for the water to be consecrated. So put it into a klisharis, but don't have intention. The Gemara is asking, why do you have to put it into one vessel and then exchange it to another vessel? Put it into the real vessel, but just don't have the intention yet. Amar zirik saber ein shir lamayim, klisharis mekachin shlemidas. Ziri says that this is avoided because of two separate halachas. One is that the klisharis does not need intention. It consecrates with intention or without intention. Second of all, there is no limit to the amount of water. See, what you could have said is that maybe put in too much water. And then we'll say that because there's so much water, the klisharis is not effective. So we won't consecrate it. So we say it doesn't work like that. The klisharis consecrates it even if there's too much water. And it also consecrates without intention. So therefore, this water is going to be a problem if it's in a klisharis. If you would bring it with a mekudeshes, with it means a klisharis, a consecrated vessel, then it would become pasul because it would become invalid because it was overnight. That was one answer why we can't use a regular Beis Hamikdash vessel. Who answered that? Zeiri. Chizkiya says klisharis ein mekachin ela midas. And you want to know the truth? The truth is it doesn't become consecrated. So if that's the case, why don't you just use a regular vessel? Holy. Why don't you just use a regular Beis Hamikdash vessel, a regular holy vessel? So the problem is, there's a gezerah. The truth is the water doesn't become consecrated unless you want it to. But people may say that water doesn't become pasul belina, or water or wine. The nesachim the libations don't become pasul when left overnight. Not open, just left overnight. It's a gezerah. maybe people will say that you actually had intention for it to become consecrated. So then why are you using it the following day? On Shabbos morning, how are you allowed to use it? It's left overnight, it becomes puzzle. People will say, well, water and wine don't become puzzle overnight. It's only meat and other things. That's exist. So therefore we say put it into a keli that's not a klisharis. Amar Rab Yanai, Amar Rab Zera, Filtem Yeshia Lamayim, Klishar Sem Kacham Elamidas, Gzer Shamir Mekiddush Yadayim Raglayim Malan. I'm going to say like this. If you use a klisharis, we're going to say that he filled it up for Kiddush Yadayim Beraglayim, to wash the Kohen Gadol hands and feet. They would use a bowl in Yom Kippur. And there's no measurement for that. And it would become consecrated. Now, even if we say that a regular klisharis has to have the right amount of liquid, whether it's water or wine, in order for it to become consecrated, but not for Kiddush Yadayim B'Raglayim. So there's a gezerah that people will think, you filled it up for Kiddush Yadayim B'Raglayim, and it really does become consecrated. Even though you didn't do that. You filled it up for Nisach HaMayim, for the pouring of the water the following day. But people will say that water doesn't have a problem of being left overnight. Ein lina mayelas b'nesachim, but not just water. The libations don't have a problem. It's basically the same concept that Chizkiah said, that there's a gzeira. Reb Yanai, in the name of Reb Zera, is saying the same thing, that there's a gzeira. The only difference is that Chizkiah said, the truth is, the halacha is that there's no problem here. Reb Yanai, in the name of Reb Zera, the truth is that, and according to halacha, there's no problem here. They're both saying the same thing. The only thing is that Reb Yanai is throwing in one more factor, that there could be a problem here. Because if it was for Kiddush Yadayim B'Raglayim, then there's a real problem. According to Chizkiah, no, there's no problem here at all. Because Klisharis is not Mekadesh al Midas. Okay. Okay, fine. Nishbachei Neskalsa Chulu. Yeah, the last Gemara we just explained why you didn't use a Klisharis. That was what we explained. You filled it up on Friday with the regular keli, because the klisharis could lead to some complications. Let's say you filled it up in a regular keli, but it got uncovered, but it spilt. So we said then they would take new water, but they would take it from the kiyar. The kiyar was the basin that was in between the mizbeach and the heichal, but it was lowered down into a well. So that water was acceptable because it was in the ground. It had a pulley that they made. We learned to Masechtas Yoma. The Gemara says, what's the problem? Why can't you just strain the water? Let's say the Mishnah doesn't fit with Reb Nechemia. Reb Nechemia, his opinion is, the Tanya, started in a Brisa, Misanenes yesh b'mishum gila. The first opinion here says that a strainer has a problem of being left open because maybe a snake drank from it. Amar Reb Nechemia says, when would this be a problem? Reb Nechemia says that there's two parts to a strainer. There's the upper part and the lower part. The upper part, you don't drink from. You drink from what drips down into the lower part. You strain it, right? It drips into the lower one. If the lower one has a cover on it, let's say a cloth cover, it wouldn't let any, it wouldn't let the snake go inside to drink. So if the lower one is covered, even though the upper part is open, it's not a problem. Why? Because if the snake drank from the upper one, the venom of the snake would stay above like a sponge. I guess it's like more puffy, the venom, and it wouldn't drip through. So what are we saying over here? That there's a problem with using the water that was left overnight, that was left open overnight, even if it wasn't in a kli sharis. What's really the problem? Just strain it. According to Reb Nechemia, unless we say the Mishnah is not Reb Nechemia. The Gemara says a filu tamer Reb Nechemia. You could say the Mishnah is Reb Nechemia. Heimadam Reb Nechemia lahadiyat. Reb Nechemia is just talking about if you need to go ahead and drink it, fine. Aval legavaya miyamar. But to use it in the Beis Hamikdash, would he say that you should do that? If you would give this to your minister, to your governor, would he be appeased? Says Hashem, the God of hosts. No. So therefore, for the Beis Hamikdash, you can't use it. That's why you have to get new water. Okay. Yitzi. We have a siyum coming up on Wednesday.
In Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, okay. Okay. Chalil. You start a new parak. Chalil is the flute. This is about the Simchas Beis Sheva. This is the happy part of the Masechta. The whole Masechta is happy. The whole Masechta is Sukkah. This is the very happy part. It's Chamisha V'Shisha. This was done either 5 days or 6 days. And the reason is because the Chalil, the flute that was used in the celebration, does not push off Shabbos or Yom Tov. So that would leave you with only 5 days. Unless, of course, the first day of Yom Tov fell on Shabbos, then you would have 6 days Cholamayid. Yeah, the kids always think about this, how many days trips they have. So if Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, then they have 6 days of Cholamayid. Well, that's not really because we have 2 days Yom Tov. But let's say in Eretz Yisrael, 6 days Cholamayid. So, but if Yom Tov is not on Shabbos, then Yom Tov is going to be then Shabbos is going to be during the Cholamayid, and you're only going to have 5 days. So it's either 5 or 6. Doesn't push off Shabbos and Yom Tov, the simplest Beis Sheva. Okay, Yitzmar. We have a statement, Rav Yehuda v'Ravina. 2 early Amiroim. Rav Yehuda and Ravina. Rav Yehuda is very common, Ravina is less common. Rav Yehuda is the student of Rav, famous student of Rav, and Shmuel. Is the founder of the yeshiva in Pompadisa. Chad Tani Shayeva v'Chad Tani Chashuva. It doesn't tell us who says what, but when you talk about Simchas Beis HaShayeva, one of them said Simchas Beis HaShayeva, and one of them said Simchas Beis HaChashuva. Yeah. Amar Marzutra. Mandatani Shayeva le Mishtabish, Mandatani Chashuva le Mishtabish. Marzutra says they're not mistaken. They're both correct. Mandatani Shayeva le Mishtabish Tiksev V'Shavta Mayim B'Sasin. I have a pasuk. It says they draw water with joy. Mandatani Chashuva le Mishtabish Tam Rav Nachman Mitzvah Chashuva here. Ba Mishesh Mei Bereshis. That was a statement from Rav Nachman. Mitzvah Chashuva. I thought Rabbi Yehuda would be earlier than Rav Nachman, but actually they're probably the same generation. So I guess that what it means is that Rav Nachman must be quoting earlier statements. He's saying it in that this is called a mitzvah chashuva. Simchas Beis Sheva is a very important mitzvah. It comes from the 6 days of creation. Doesn't mean that the mitzvah is from the 6 days of creation. It means that the those tubes that were that they poured the water, that those caverns underneath, they were there from the 6 days of creation. Okay, Tanur Abanan. Yeah, by the way, I should say I got Daniel's new book, Daniel's Naranya, but it's a calendar. You know, Daniel Kani made this. He put it on the chat. Yeah, what reminded me of that? Oh, because of the 6 days of creation, Daniel had a comment on that. That it was was it Reb Sheshis? What's in it? He said Sheetin and Sheshis and gracious. He was connecting them. It's interesting. The Gemara before said Reb Eina says that Ushavtem Mayim Besasin. That was Reb Eina. So maybe we could figure out who holds what. You know, the Gemara just says Chad Tani, Chad Tani. But if we would want to guess, we would say Reb Eina was the one that said Ushavtem Mayim Besasin because he's the one that quoted that pasuk before. Yeah, that would be interesting. Okay, we'll leave that to Reb Reuven Margolius. He does those connections. Taner Rabbanan, Hachalil Deichas Shabbos, Divra B'Yisib Rabbi Yehuda, V'Chachamim Af Yom Tovin Deicha. Okay, this is a very interesting sugya. This is a discussion about singing in the Beis Hamikdash, the orchestra. What's the main part of it? Is the main part the vocals, or is the main part the musical instruments? Everyone agrees you have both. Question is which one's the main one and which one is the accompaniment. So the Gemara starts off like this. It says the Chalil, the instrument, the musical instrument, the flute, it pushes off Shabbos. In other words, you play the flute even on Shabbos. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai. He was a student of Rabbi Akiva, and his son is Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. It's the generation of Rabbi. You know, like last generation of Tanaim. The Chacham say Af Yom Tovin Deicha. The Chacham say it doesn't push off Shabbos. Not only doesn't it push off Shabbos, it doesn't push off Yom Tov. Now, Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is the Amira, Rabbi Yosef. He's the friend of Rabbah. He's the teacher of Abaya. It says Machlekes Bashir Shel Karban. What are they arguing about today? Arguing about the song that comes along with the sacrifices. The Rabbi Yossi Savar, Rabbi Yossi means Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. He holds Ikashir Bekeli. He says that, look, this is part of the service of the temple. So the temple service is performed on Shabbos. So if the main service of singing, of the music accompaniment, is the instruments, so then it violates the Shabbos. You push off the Shabbos. Not that it violates. It's performed on Shabbos. Because what's the problem of using a musical instrument? You may fix it. That's just a rabbinic decree. Ain't Shvus b'mikdash. You don't have rabbinic decrees. You use the musical instrument on in Shabbos. There's no problem. In the temple to use to do it the Rabbanan wasn't a problem. Okay. V'avaydahi v'daicha Shabbos, it's an avayda, and it pushes off the Shabbos. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef is saying which musical accompaniment, what songs are we referring to? We're referring to the songs that come along with the carbon. Yeah. V'Rabbanan Savri Ikashir B'Peh. The Rabbanan hold no, that the main accompaniment, musical accompaniment with the sacrifices was the choir, and the instruments are not part of the service. And they don't push off Shabbos. Instruments are just there to accompany the choir. Yeah. I think the machlekes is it depends what type of music it was. If it was chazanas, the piano is just there to accompany. If it's some other heavy music, so then the music was the main thing, and the singers was just to accompany the instrument. Okay. Abel Shir Shel Shriyeva Divrei Kol Simchi Bein Adeiches HaShabbos. Rabbi Yosef concludes, everyone agrees that when it comes to the Simchas Beis HaSheva, nothing pushes off. The Simchas Beis HaSheva is not performed on Shabbos. Everyone agrees to that. And it was our Mishnah that the Chalil, Chamisha, Veshisha is according to Rabbi Yosef as well. It doesn't push off Shabbos. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, Mina, how do I know this? The Bahapligi, that this is the machlekes. Titania, because we have a brisa. Klisharis shasan shaleitz. I have a brisa like this. The utensils in the Beis Hamikdash that were made out of wood. Rabbi Paisel and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Machsher. Rabbi says that the utensils need to be metal. And Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says they could be made out of wood. The kosher if they're made out of wood. We're talking about the regular utensils, the cups and the spoons and everything that was used with the blood and everything, whatever, all those other utensils, were they allowed to be made out of wood? My love, but come in for you. What's the machlekes? Why are they arguing about this? Can the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash be made out of wood? We know that there was one utensil in the Beis Hamikdash that was wood. It was a flute that Moshe made. It was made out of a reed. And the Gemara in Erechem says that they made it out of wood, but then they tried to cover it. They coated it in metal and gold, and it didn't sound as clear. So they took off the coat, and the sound came back. So this was.
I remember that.
So this was one utensil that was made out of wood. Now, how important was that utensil? So it depends. If the main musical accompaniment of the karbanos was the instruments, then this was a real klisharis. But if the main musical accompaniment is the singing, and the instruments are just an accompaniment to the singing, then the flute of Moshe is not so significant, and you can't learn from that to any other vessels in the temple. Man the Pasal Sabr Kashir Bepeh, the one that says that it's invalid, which is Rebbe, he says that the main thing is the singing, the choir. You can't learn from the flute. The buva is the flute. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Man the Masha Sabr Kashir Bekeli Biafin me buva the Moshe. Man the Pasal Sabr Kashir Bepeh Valayalfin me buva the Moshe. Okay. That's the machlekes. Can you learn from the flute or not? Depends if the main thing is the choir or the main thing is the orchestra. Where it says like, not necessarily is that the machlekes. The kuliyam ekashir bekeli. The truth is, everyone holds that the orchestra is the main part of the music in the Beis Hamikdash. We have a very interesting machlekes. Just because you have one instrument in the Beis Hamikdash that's made out of wood doesn't mean that you're allowed to have instruments that are made out of wood. That one instrument that was made out of wood was because it was impossible to make it out of anything else. So there's an exception. The machlekes over here is, can you learn from that exception? Can you say that because we made one exception, because it was impossible to get the sound correct, so therefore you're allowed to use wood? Other one says, no, we made one exception. You can't learn from that. It's called danan efsher misha'i efsher. Can you learn what's possible from what's impossible? In other words, all vessels could be made out of metal. They don't need to be made out of wood. There was only one vessel that needed to be made out of wood. The word the efsher means impossible, like ein efsher. So, do I learn from that exception or not? Man de machshir, the one that says that it's kosher to have vessels out of wood, so we're done in efsher misha'i efsher. He holds that we learn from that exception. You learn efsher, what's possible, from the impossible. It's impossible to get the sound from a metal vessel, so therefore we made it out of wood. That's the case, then you're allowed to use other vessels out of wood. Man de pasel, the one that says that it's invalid to have vessels out of wood, savar, it's the base. Ain't done an efsher mishi efsher, that you can't learn from what's impossible. Okay. That's we tried to match up that Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds that the main musical accompaniment of the sacrifice is the choir, is the orchestra, because he holds that wooden vessels are acceptable. We said not necessarily. Could be that has nothing to do with that. Just has to do with, it could be that everyone holds that the main, even Rebbe holds that the orchestra is the main thing. Yeah, that's how we could say it. If you want, you could say the Kol Yal Mikashir, the Peh could go exactly the opposite. Even Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda holds the main musical accompaniment is the choir. And you really can't learn from the flute. But we have no source because the flute wasn't significant. And really, there's another source over here that's under discussion. See, by the menorah, it says, "Vasisa menorah." You should make the menorah. Okay, it sounds like you can make it out of anything. But then the pasuk goes on and it says, "Zahav tar," make it out of pure gold. It says, "Oh, I guess I have to make it out of gold." Then it goes on and it says, "Miksha tasis," you should make it solid. Or baned, hammered out. Now, okay, now miksha doesn't tell me what material it is. Could be any material. So we call this a klal uprat to klal. A general rule, a specific, and then back to the general. Now there's a machlekes in general. There's a fundamental machlekes how the Torah is learned. Do you use the rule of klal uprat to klal, or do you use the rule of riba miyut riba? Now, the difference is like this. Klal uprat to klal goes like this. When I said menorah, what was the pasuk? Vasisa menorah. When I said vasisa menorah, that didn't tell me what type of material. I could use any material. Then when you said zahav, I've just restricted the entire general rule to specifically gold. Okay, so now I limited it down. So now when I reintroduce another generality, and I said miksha, so I've added in some extra things. So I limited it to gold, and now I've added in some things that are similar to gold, which would be other metals. And that's what I'm left with. So in other words, the menorah can only be made out of metal. That's the klal uprat. Now the key, the klal uprat, is that the prat, the detail, the specific, limits the entire klal. How does it limit it? By being the commentary for the klal. I know I told you that you can make it out of everything, but what I meant was specifically this. I just didn't get to the point yet. So the prat limits the entire klal. Now, when you reintroduce the second klal, you just have similar to the prat. That's where you left. Riba miyat riba is the opposite. It starts off like this. It says you should make the menorah. Okay, I can make it out of everything. Then it says gold. So gold, that's limiting it. It's limiting it down, but not specifically to gold. It's limiting it to everything that's similar to gold, because you already had a general rule. It's just putting a limitation on it. I don't know exactly the extent of that limitation, but it's not specifically gold. It's not a translation of the klal. It's not a full limitation. So then when I reintroduce the klal, so I'm bringing back everything. So then why did he have a limit? It says, well, okay, we'll just restrict one thing. What will we leave out? We'll leave out earthenware. So the riba miyat riba, the miyat is not a limitation. It's not a full limitation. It's just a diminishing of the klal. How much does it diminish? Just one thing in the end. In the end, it just diminishes one thing, which is, so the machlekes over here about the menorah would be, are the kalim be allowed to be made out of wood? So if I hold klal prat klal, then the kalim need to be metal. If I hold riba miyat riba, then the kalim are allowed to be wood as well. They just are not allowed to be earthenware, clay. Okay, let's see this inside. So the machlekes here is if you do the klal prat, which is a general and specific, or riba yamiyat, or inclusion and exclusion. Rabbi Darish Klali Prati. Rabbi says that you do the general and specific. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Darish Riba Yamiyuti. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Huda says you do the inclusion and the exclusion. Rabbi Darish Klali Prati. Rabbi says you do the general and the specific. Basisa Menorah is a klal. It says you should make the menorah. That's the general. Zav tar, pure gold, prat. That's the specific. Okay, I've limited it down to just gold. Miksha tasa menorah. Should make it out of hammered out. Chazur klal. That's a generalization again. Klal, pratu klal. When I have those three, right? The general, specific, and general. Yet the danel kalam pekena prat. What I'm left with is only things that are very similar to the specific. Ma prat mafur shamateches. Just like the specific is metal. Of kol shamateches, everything has to be metal. In other words, if it really needed to be gold, then I wouldn't have had the klal at the end. The klal at the end is an inclusion again, so it adds in everything that's similar, which includes all metals, but I still don't have wood. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda darish riba yamiyat. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda does it the other way. He says that it's an inclusion and an exclusion. Basisa menorah, you should make the menorah riba. You're including every type of material. Zavtar miyat. Now you're excluding something. Miksha tasa menorah chazav riba. Now you're including again. Riba miyat to riba akol. When you have an inclusion, exclusion, and inclusion, you're including everything. My Rabbi, what are you including? Rabbi Komil, you're including everything. My miyat, and what are you excluding? Miyat shel cheres, you're only excluding earthenware, which means that you're allowed to make the vessels out of wood. Okay. Amar Papa. Papa says, this machlekes that we had before, if the ikar shira b'peh, if the main music of the Beis Hamikdash is the choir, the main music is the orchestra, that's actually kitanoi. That's actually a machlekes tanoi. The Tanan, as it was taught in Erechim, says like this: Avdei Kayanim Hayu. Who was there playing the flute? says they were servants of Kayanim. Divrei Reb Meir, that's what Reb Meir says. Reb Meir's opinion was that if you saw people playing in the orchestra, it does not mean that they're eligible to marry into the Jewish families. So it did not bother Reb Meir at all that there were people in the orchestra that were actually slaves. Rabbi Yossi mishpachas beis Apagar, mishpachas beis Siparia, umi Amnon hayu sheimasim lekuna. Rabbi Yossi says no. He says anyone in the orchestra was eligible to marry into the community. He held that if you were standing there on the platform, you're for sure kosher. Yeah, the women could look out and say, "Oh, I would like to marry that one." Okay. Rabbi Chanina ben Antigna saying, "Leviyim hayu." Chanina ben Antigna says much more than that. If they were in the orchestra, you could even give them maisa. They were Leviyim. Okay. Yeah, right in the band in the yeshiva. So we get these excellent musicians to come and teach. So one of the musicians, he comes in, he wears a white shirt. He's not a religious guy. He's Jewish, but he plays the trumpet, plays everything, but he plays the trumpet. So he wears a white shirt. He's shortish. He looks like about the size of the Bachram. He doesn't have a beard. And we put a yarmulke on him, and we put him in the band, and he fits right in. Like he looks like one of the Bachram. So he just goes in there and he plays together with the Bachram as they're playing, to assist them. So you can't really tell that he's a real professional. Yeah, so that would fit only with Reb Meir. Yeah, it doesn't tell you who he's. Just because he's on the platform doesn't mean that he's one of the yeshiva.
I'm gonna tell Aaron Margolis to listen to this recording. Brother.
Yeah. Okay. My love b'hakamiflagi. This must be the machlekes. We have three opinions here. We have Reb Meir, Reb Yossi, and Reb Chanina ben Antignis. The machlekes is as follows. The one that says that they were servants, they hold that the main thing in the Beis Hamikdash is the choir anyway. It's not the instruments. So the people that were playing the instruments didn't have to be even part of the Jewish families. They could have been servants. The one that says Rabbi Chanina ben Antigna says no, the main thing was the orchestra. I mean, we needed to have Leviyim there. Leviyim were the ones that were playing. Okay. The problem is, what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Rabbi Yossi was the middle opinion. He held that they were definitely Jewish, but not necessarily Leviyim. But his Rabbi Yossi, he says, how can you say this? What does Rabbi Yossi hold? If he holds the main thing is the choir, then why can't the orchestra be the servants? And how could they be Yisraelim if it's part of the Avodah, the orchestra? Ela de Kuli Alma, the Gemara says, no, you got it wrong. Everyone agrees. Ikashir b'peh, that this has nothing to do with. This has nothing to do with is the orchestra part of the service. Everyone agrees the orchestra is not the service. About Kamiflagi, there's a machlekes, is a separate issue. This one says, happened to be the fact. They found good musicians amongst the slaves. The other one says they found good musicians amongst the Israelites. The other one says they found good musicians amongst the Levim. But it has nothing to do with what was acceptable. It didn't matter because the main thing was the choir anyway. The Gemara says, so then why do you have to discuss it? The reason why they're discussing it is because when you look at the platform stage that they're playing, what assumptions can you make? That's the question. Can you now assume that they're kosher? Can you also they're arguing, can you take someone from the platform and say that you can definitely marry them, and that you can you say that you can definitely give them Maisa? Yeah. Let's say there would be a shidduch. Let's say, yeah, but how do you know that they're from the kosher family? They're a Jewish family. Maybe that was a slave. And say, well, what do you mean? His grandfather played on the Maccabi team, or something. So okay. So the one that says that they were slaves, they say that you can't raise someone up from the platform, from the stage, to say that he comes from a kosher lineage, and for sure not for Maisa to say that he's a Levite. Mandam Yisrael Hayo, one that says that he's Yisrael, no, he definitely is a kosher lineage. But doesn't mean he's a Levite. Mandam Levima, Ksavar Malam Miduchan, Ben Lios and Ben Lamaiser. And then Rabbi Chanina ben Antigna said, no, they only took Levium, which means that if you see someone there, it's for sure not a problem. Yeah. Today, if someone is in the process of conversion, the schools will accept them into the children. The schools will accept the children into the school, and when the conversion's done, they'll convert and whatever. But that's part of the learning process. If they don't finish the process, so then you have this well-educated child that never actually converted and want to get married to, of course, one of their good friends from the class. So, or one of the good friend's sister.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it would be from school, I hope. So, yeah, they have to follow through to make sure that the conversion is done. Just say, well, he went to a Chabad school, he went to a from school or something. So it's not 100% proof. It's a 99% proof, but it's not 100% proof. Because there is that chance that maybe, they'd want to see the actual document as well. Okay. We explained that there's a machlekes Rab Yosi Rab Yehuda and the Chachamim regarding the flute of the sacrifice if it pushes off Shabbos. But everyone agrees that Simchas Beis Sheva does not push off Shabbos and Yom Tov. That was Rab Yosef's opinion. Comes along Rab Yirmiyah bar Abba, one Amud later, and he disagrees. He says, Rab Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar machlekes b'shir shel sheyeva. The machlekes is the Simchas Beis Sheva flute. In other words, our Mishnah is really a machlekes. The Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda Savar Simcha Yisera Nami Deiches Shabbos. Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda holds that the Simchas Beis Sheva pushes off Shabbos. Why? There's no problem with it. What are you going to do? You're going to fix the flute? It's in the base of Mikdash. Ain't Shabbos b'Mikdash. So what's the machlekes? Why do the Chachamim say that you can't use the flute? Rabbanan Savi Simcha Yisera Deiches Shabbos. They say it's just an extra simcha. It doesn't push off Shabbos. When it comes to the sacrifices, the musical accompaniment of the sacrifices, of course, was done on Shabbos. Very basic machlekes now. What was going on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash? Was there music there? Or were they just singing? Were they singing Zmiris? It was the music. According to Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda, there was clearly music. According to the Rabbanan, there was also music. Question is Simchas Beis Sheva. This is all Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba's opinion. The whole machlekes is just Simchas Beis Sheva. Yeah. Okay. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. The question is going to go back on Reb Yosef, not Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba. Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba has a solid shot. Okay. Shir shel sheyeva deichas Shabbos de Reb Yosef Reb Yehuda. The song of the Simchas Beis Sheva pushes off Shabbos. That's the opinion of Reb Yosef Reb Yehuda. V'chachamim may map Yom Tov pein deicha. Some say it doesn't push off even Yom Tov. Tzifta de Reb Yosef. The Kashan Reb Yosef. See, Reb Yosef Reb Yehuda holds that it pushes off Shabbos. Reb Yosef said that no one said that it pushes off Shabbos. The Simchas Beis Sheva. Umar says you're right, Tzifta. It's a strong question. So the question that we asked on Rav Yosef was a question from Simchas Beis Sheva. There is one other question we can ask on him. What about Shir Shel Karban, a regular sacrifice, the Karban Tamid, that had the song that came along with it? Did they play? According to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, they definitely played. And according to the Rabbanan, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, they played also by the Karban. What do we see from this? Gemara says, "Lema b'shir shel sheva the pligav b'shir shel karban devrak kol deichas Shabbos." You see, there's a machlekes about Simchas Beis Sheva. That implies that when it comes to the shir shel karban, everyone agrees that they're allowed to play on Shabbos. That's a double question on Reb Yosef, because he said that it was only Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda said that said shir shel karban was acceptable on Shabbos, but not the Rabbanon. It's a machlekes. It's a double question on Rabbi Yosef. Yeah, let me just clarify. We have a machlekes if you're allowed to play the flute on Shabbos. The question is, when is that machlekes? Rabbi Yosef said that's about a regular sacrifice, but no one holds that you're allowed to play the flute for the Simchas Beis Sheva. That was Rabbi Yosef's opinion. But on a regular sacrifice, one opinion said yes. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said there's a machlekes about the Simchas Beis Sheva. There's one opinion that says yes, but the flute for the sacrifice, everyone says yes. We quote a brisa that says Simchas Beis Sheva, one opinion says yes. Okay, Rabbi Yosef was wrong. Question is he wrong about both things, or is he wrong about just the Simchas Beis Sheva? So we deduce from the fact that it says that there's a machlekes about the Simchas Beis Sheva, that sounds like there's no machlekes about Shir Shel Karban, and everyone would agree. So it's a machlekes only about the Simchas Beis Sheva, which means Rabbi Yosef was wrong about that. He held, no one held that. Turns out one person does hold that. And when it comes to the Shir Shel Karban, he held that there was only one person, and it turns out that everyone agrees to that. Double question on Rabbi Yosef. The Gemara says, Amalach Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is trying to salvage, at least I should only be have one question on me, not two questions. It says, Pligi b'shir shel sheva din lekarban. Don't knock me out entirely. They're actually arguing about both. So I said that there's a machlekes about Shir Shel Karban, that there's only one opinion. The truth is there really is only one opinion. But there was only one opinion about the Simchas Beis Sheva. Yeah, that's true. They're arguing about both. So then why did they mention the machlekes by Shir Shel Sheva? The Simchas Beis Sheva. If you're allowed to play there, for sure you're allowed to play by the Karban. Or the opposite, maybe. Just because if you're not allowed to play by the Karban, for sure you're not allowed to play there. The Gemara says, well, it's trying to tell us the Chiddush, that if you're allowed to play by the Simchas Beis Sheva, for sure you can play by the Karban. Okay. The problem is, what does it mean when it says, this is the Chalil of Beis HaSheva that doesn't push off Shabbos or Yom Tov? It sounds like Karban does push off. Whose opinion would that be? Now, according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't. Rabbi Yehuda allows it. It's not specifically Simchas Beis HaSheva. In other words, the Shir Shel Karban, the Chalil, the flute that comes along with the regular sacrifice, with the regular Karban Tamid. Does that push off Shabbos? It can't be. So the problem is that right now what we have is, if Simchas Beis HaSheva pushes off Shabbos, so does the Shir Shel Karban. If Simchas Beis HaSheva doesn't, so does Shir Shel Karban. That's what we're left with. The problem is we have a Mishnah that says Simchas Beis HaSheva doesn't, but Karban does. So no one holds that middle. It says, Rabbi Yehuda, if you say it's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, Shir Shel Sheva Namidachi. He holds that the Simchas Beis HaSheva pushes off Shabbos. El Lav Rabbanan. Must be the opinion of the Rabbanan that holds only Karban, but not Simchas Beis HaSheva. Tifta the Rabbi Yosef Tarti Tifta. Okay, we're stuck. Rabbi Yosef has a double question on him. We're going to accept the opinion of Rabbi Yirmiyah Barabba that everyone agrees that Shir Shel Karban pushes off Shabbos, and Simchas Beis HaSheva is a machlekes. Okay. Let's finish till the Mishnah. My time at the Manda Amar Ikashira Bekele. We're going to quote two psukim over here, both from Divrei Hayamim. What's the source that the main music in the Beis Hamikdash is the orchestra? Chizkiyo said, bring up the sacrifice on the altar. When they were bringing it up, the song of Hashem started and the trumpets were blasting through the instruments of David, Melech Yisrael. The instruments. It sounds like the instruments, the orchestra is the main thing. My time at the Manda Merkashir Bepeh. What's the source that the main music is the choir? It was one for the trumpeters and for the musicians to make one sound. Okay? It sounds like it's with their voice. Vidachnami, 1 second. Oh, you can't get rid of that pasuk. There was a pasuk that said vessels. What it means is that the song of David, or the song of Hashem, was there with their mouths, and it was accompanied with musical instruments, but the main thing was the mouth. There's going to be an easy way out of this. But it says that it was one sound, the trumpeters and the singers. It means is the singers similar to the trumpeters. Just like the trumpeters have a trumpet, so too the singers, Mishayrim doesn't mean specifically singing, it means the musicians. The music was also with instruments. So there's different ways of reading that passage. Let's leave it over here.
I didn't get to say my Avi Piamente flute joke.